Advanced English Arabic Learning Phrasal Verbs, Session 18. I sniffed around to see if I could find a better deal. A couple of journalists are sniffing around. Customs use dogs to sniff out illegal drugs being smuggled in. He made millions sniffing out tax loopholes for companies. Our rivals are trying to sniff out our plans for expansion. She felt like a fifth grader who had snitched on a classmate. He was caught after someone snitched on him to the teacher. She wouldn't tell who snitched on me. I snuffed out the candles before I went to bed. His life was snuffed out by a sniper's bullet. He got snuffed out in a gang war. The old girls snuffed it. I messed up the first question, which snuffed out my chances of getting a good grade. That coffee sobered him up. Keith sobered up a bit when we left the pub. Let's go and leave him alone to sober up. He was left to sober up in a police cell. The bombardment softened up their defenses. I paid for everything to soften them up before they made the decision. He just soldiered on and never complained. I soldiered with your father on his last 4 campaigns. Graham wasn't enjoying this, but he soldiered on. Has the firm sorted out its tax problems yet? She sorted out the clothes, some to be kept, some to be thrown away. They are anxious to sort out traveling arrangements. The teacher helps the children to sort out their problems. I need time to sort myself out. If he can't pay you, I'll sort him out. Pietro started sounding off to the press. He sounded off about the quality of the food. We'll sound out Parliament first. Officials arrived to sound out public opinion at meetings in factories. You should sound her out to get her opinion. The riot was sparked off by the police raid on the club. They sparked up in a no-smoking area. People are afraid to speak out in oppressive political regimes. They couldn't hear the speaker and asked him to speak up a bit. He won't understand you unless you spell everything out for him. I had to spell my surname out to him as he didn't know how to spell it. The volcano is spewing out lava and hot gases. He spewed up when he was drunk. The crowd spilled out onto the streets after the match had ended. The container was cracked and the chemicals spilled out. I let my frustration spill out. The protests and demonstrations have spilled over into neighboring states. I forgot to turn the tap off and the water spilled over. The research spun off a number of new products. They spun off the retail division last year. They spun it off from the main show, but it didn't really attract many viewers. The car hit the water and spun out. I spun the work out to make as much money from the job as I could. They spirited her away before the police arrived. They spirited him off before any trouble started. Hurry up, spit it out. I can't wait all day for the truth. He spat her name out when he saw her arrive. The story was splashed across the front pages. She splashed cold water onto her face. They splashed each other with water. A tear fell and splashed onto the pillow. A field splashed with purple clover. Apollo 10 splashed down after a harrowing flight. If you're really ready to splash out, book into one of the 6 private penthouse suites. We went to an expensive restaurant and splashed out to celebrate. I splashed out on a new camera, shell out. A group of Nottinghamshire miners split away to create a separate union. The river had split into a number of channels. The teacher split the class up into groups of 4. After the band split up, Tex became a railway clerk. Let's split up and find the other 2. They are always splitting up and then getting back together again, breaking up. The party was deeply split over its future direction. I told him I wouldn't split on him. Cooper was spoiling for a fight. He's been spoiling for an argument all day. I'll sponge it down before putting it away. She sponged him down in an attempt to cool his fever. I'll go and sponge this orange juice off my dress. They found they could earn a perfectly good living by sponging off others. Let's go to New York, we can always sponge off my brother there. A lot of people are sponging on the state by claiming benefits they're not entitled to. We spruced the flat up before we put it on the market. The fund will be used to spruce up historic buildings. I need to spruce myself up a bit before we go out to dinner. We spruced up the room with a fresh coat of paint. The lock springs back when the key is turned. Don't spring for the album until you've heard it. She is going to spring for all their medical bills. He sprang from the bushes when I walked past. His anger springs from his feelings of insecurity. We decided to spring a surprise on them. They sprung a birthday party on me at work. A terrible storm sprang up. Charity shops are springing up in the recession. I sprang out of bed. Her son's passion for computer games spurred her on to set up a software business. She spurred her horse towards the hedge. The thought of the bonus spurred her on to complete the work on time. There are few things I have to square away before I can leave. The 2 drunks squared off. They squared off against the police when they arrived. Can I square up with you for last night? The companies are squaring up for a fight. They need to square up to what they did wrong if we are to make any progress. What he said doesn't square with what the others said. 4 of us had to squeeze up in the back of the car. I stacked up the boxes. Work stacked up while I was away on holiday. I've been stacking up a lot of air miles. The budget figures don't stack up, add up. Planes were stacking up while the airport was closed after the bomb threat. The new model doesn't stack up against the old one. A lot of the retail shops around here staff up with temporary workers for the holiday rush. Our stores in the community are staffed up and open for business. They haven't staffed the project up yet. Urgent action is required to stamp out corruption. I was able to stamp the small fire out. Tom stamped out the sparks before they started a fire. The doctors are trying to stamp out the disease. A campaign to stamp out drugs in schools. We stood about drinking coffee before the lecture. We stood around for an hour waiting for them to turn up. She stood aside to let them enter. I blazed with rage, then stood back and assessed the situation. He stand aside and let a new leader head the party. We stood back while he lit the firework. We need to stand back and look at the problem differently. He stood by her throughout the trial as he believed her to be innocent. The emergency services were standing by waiting for the plane to land. She will stand down at the next election. The judge told the witness to stand down after the questioning. No further action was required and all units stood down. If something doesn't happen soon, I reckon they'll stand us down. I'm not going to stand for their rudeness any longer. What do the letters BBC stand for? The town stood on a hill. She had to stand in for the editor while he was on holiday. She stood out from the crowd in selection and was offered the job. Everybody stood up when the judge entered the court. He agreed to meet me last night, but he stood me up. He's the kind of manager who will always stand up for his staff. She stood up to the police when they tried to corrupt her. This coat will stand up to the roughest weather conditions. I stared him straight in the eye, but he didn't recognize me. The two stared each other down after the match. He was angry, but I stared him down. The end. Coming next. Session 19.